afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul, and I am a nerd, and you are lucky enough to be here for the August 2017 Eclipse episode of the Tabs3 virtual user group meeting. I know it's not Eclipse Day. I know that was last Monday, but it's still the August 2017 episode, and so therefore it is the Eclipse episode. Today we're talking about, what are we talking about? Printers. Printers. Everything is printers. There aren't two topics today because we have a whole episode devoted exclusively to printers in Tabs and AP and GL and Trust. Make a note, Mary Jo, we forgot checks. We got to talk about that too. Checks, reports, different settings for the same printer, all of it. We're going to cover it all. So hold on to your seatbelts, buckle your seatbelts, hold on to your chairs. This is going to be about as exciting as it gets around here. Without any further ado, I am going to press a series of magic buttons, just magical buttons, that will take us to a point where Mary Jo can start to talk about printers. And let me get you to that point, Mary Jo. Oops. I'm having a little trouble here pressing all the magic buttons. But
I like that. Oops.
Oops. Yeah, that's never a good sound, is it?
All right.
Okay.
Well, we're going to start here in Tabs, and the Setup button in our task folders takes us into a area that we can go into the print setup. When we change our defaults and things over here, then that's going to be the default for this machine, or this user, I should say, for that particular setting. So this is where we can come back and have things stick, per se. So we have our printer list here. You can do your drop down and see all your available printers that you have. These are the ones we have right now. This screen has some page setup, statement setup, and advanced printing features, and we're going to go through all of these. And you also have the ability to click on the setup button here and go directly into that printer's settings to do landscape or change your what printer size paper you have in there, legal or whatever. And what source it's coming from, whether it's the manual feed tray or, tray 1, that kind of thing. And then you can further go into your properties here and then get into what your layout. This is just your printer. This is how you can access your printer settings through the software. So this is the printer part, the direct printer part. And then these are some settings within Practice Master themselves. To stick, which way are you to stick would be the Practice Master settings, because your printer settings are going to just be out there with whatever you have for your printer, but your Practice Master settings. Correct. So we have two different font selection modes, and we're not going to talk a lot about the font selections here, but usually everything is automatic. If you do decide you want to change the font selection, you can choose this to manual, and you can select how big you want those fonts to be. So do you want it 10 point, 12 point, whatever. I caution this because sometimes when we come in here and we start changing these sizes here, it makes our reports just not fit on the page anymore. It gets kind of clunky. So be careful with that. You can experiment a little bit, but if things start to get a little bit too big or off the paper, this might be the reason. You can change the actual font so it defaults to being Arial. You can select and you can change that to whatever you want here that's available, and whether it's bold or you can have different options here, and then again the font size and things like that. So those are also available in the program.
So if you want to change the font, you should leave it on automatic.
Correct. Now if I come in to the page setup section, this is where I can adjust my margins. So a lot of times people ask me, how do I get some wider margins on my paper? It's too scrunched, or things are running off the edge. Well, most of the time the problem is right here. We need to go in and we need to go ahead and up these margins. You can see that they're defaulting to something very, very small. They're very narrow. So we can come in and change this to 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, whatever, 1 inch, whatever you want those margins to be. And this is the portrait section. And then you also have the landscape section. And this is by printer. So if you change the margins for, in this case, we've got our Dell 3115 printer. I'm only changing these margins for the printer I have selected. If I want to change margins on all the printers I print from, I'd have to open up and do the drop down for each one and change the margins on there. So a lot of times I'll also have that question. I changed the margins, but it's not working. It's because I chose a different printer.
But you can set those for one printer and then move on to the other printer and set them for that printer. And those will stick then for both printers.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. And then the printer offset adjustment, this can be, a lot of times we find this, we use this with checks, when you're printing checks, because you might want your regular margins, you know, 0.5 or whatever for a report, but then it's not lining up the checks properly when we print. We have to bump it down or bump it over. And so this is the place that we can use our regular print margins that we do on normal things, but then we can just do a little offset to make that bump over or down or however we need to line up our numbers on our check. So that's the page setup section, and that's this main screen. Statement setup. Well,
I'll talk about that. Hold on. I'm muted.
There you go. All right, Paul, why don't you go ahead and take that one?
We have the ability here to select the font. It defaults, I believe, to 10-point Arial, and most people just leave it that way, but you can change it to Times New Roman or something that you're using in the firm more often. I recommend that you leave it at a 10-point because that, again, that size, if we want it to be something that's dictated by that automatic size and stuff we look at.
One thing with that font here, remember when we set up our statement designer and we're creating the header and the footer, and you create Times New Roman on that and you want the whole statement to match, okay, this is where we're changing the body of the statement. So this is where we're saying that we want that body to match whatever we've chosen for the header, footer. It's Times New Roman, like Paul said, or whatever. So this is what's changing that.
Now, I've just been informed that when you say, like Paul said, that I was muted at that point. So I had said that this is where you select the font. Don't mess around with the point size. Leave it at 10-point. But if you do want to change it to a Times New Roman or whatever, that's where you do it. Print envelopes. Do we have many people printing envelopes?
Yeah, I do have a couple that do print envelopes.
Okay, so if you do, then that you check the box, and that merely ungrays this section down here. If you don't check that box, then you can't put anything in here.
Now, something you can do with that too is you can toggle that on and off, because I do have some firms that they print envelopes for some of their statements, but not all of them. So when they run their batches to print the statements, when they do want envelopes to print, they turn this on, and then they turn it back off again when the next batch runs, because they don't need envelopes for those. So you can work with that and go in and out of this window and toggle it on and off for groups of statements you want to print.
Let's talk about that for a second, because we're in, right now, the printer setup window directly from the setup tab. And so we've told them, hey, this is where you go. This is the magic place to go to set all the things that you want to stick. Can you change this print envelopes on the fly as you're printing?
Yes. So if we were going to go in and we'll just go to a report, and we're going to print a report here. And I'm just going to tell it to OK, print. So when I get this print box here, I also can still hit that setup, and I have all of those same options. So on the fly, let's pretend this was a statement we were printing. I could come into the statement setup, and I could turn on or off that print envelopes right from there. You don't have to go all the way back out to the setup. That's a good point, Paul. You do not.
Now, when you do it from here, does it stick?
No, this is not where it sticks.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the secret. If you're coming in here and going, I turned on envelopes last time, why isn't it on now? It's because you're going in on the fly approach. Whereas if you come into the setup tab and use that button that we clicked underneath, then we get to the point where we can set the way it's going to default for everything that we do. So it's important to understand that, because there are some times when you do want to just do things on the fly. Like Mary Jo was saying, sometimes they print envelopes, sometimes they don't. They don't want to have to keep going in and setting the default. They don't want it to stick. Maybe they only rarely print envelopes, so they want to turn it on when they want. If you almost always printed envelopes, but every once in a while you didn't, you would go to the place where we are now, where you set the defaults, and make sure the print envelopes is on. and then you turn it off just those few times that you wanted to not print envelopes, and it wouldn't stick as being off. It would remember that it was supposed to be on. So when you do that, it exposes this section. And so these three sections here have to do with how these different things are going to look. The first page, the other pages, and then the envelopes. So you've got the ability to specify, the paper. You've got the ability to specify the bin that you're pulling from. You've got the ability, and you've got that for everything. So your envelopes may come from the envelope bin. Your second pages may come from bin 2. Your first page may come from bin 1 if you're printing on pre-printed letterhead, et cetera, et cetera. Then we get into things about how many blank lines before detail, and you'll see that on both the page 1 and the continuation page. And then we also have how many blank lines at the top, at page top, so that it's kind of yet another way to only on statements push that header down just a little bit, kind of like the offset that we saw that Mary Jo mentioned that you use for printing checks. This is more like how you can push just that first page margin down a little bit, because if you are printing on pre-printed letterhead, you're going to want a certain number of blank lines at the top to get you past that letterhead, and you don't want to change the margins to make that happen, because then you have that number of that blank space at the top of your continuation page as well. Now we do see compress address. This is just, if your address has, many instances, if your matters have many instances where there are no line 2 address and no line 3 address, this just tells it, hey, make that a nice looking block instead of having those blank lines. And then this is kind of a throwback to a faraway place. Back in the day when we didn't have the statement layout designer, and we couldn't simply make letterhead in there and make your statements look exactly like you wanted them to look, you could take a bitmap of your letterhead. A bitmap is just like a JPEG, or it's a picture, if you will, of your letterhead. And firms used to do this a long time ago when there was no other way to do that. And so if you've got this checked, that's why. And there's no need to change it just because we've moved into the 21st century. If that works for you, it's going to continue to work for you. But if you're coming into Tabs as a brand new client printing bills, it's unlikely that this is the methodology that you're going to use to get that bitmap at the top of your bill, because you're probably going to use the statement layout designer to make that happen. So my recommendation is, if you don't have this checked, don't go in and check it just to get something at the top of your letterhead. Okay, cancel out of here. And then Mary Jo, you want to talk about advanced, or some of them I'll talk about?
Yeah, we can go through some of these. That's kind of small. I don't know if it's going to get any bigger, but hopefully you can see this. But we have the allow variable font signs. I think it's signs and styles.
Sizes and styles.
Sizes. I can't read it. It's so small. Sizes and styles. You can use commas in all numeric fields. You can allow gray text in lines. This is where we're setting all of those little just those little detailed things.
Those little things. This next one is one of my favorites.
Yeah, print negative numbers in red. Yeah, if you want to preview those in red, that's huge. A lot of times people will look at a report and somebody else will have red, and they're like, how do they see all those negative numbers in red? And it's this little box here.
Now keep in mind, that's only on the preview. If you have a color printer, it will
the next one, it will print it, the negative numbers in red. If you have a color printer, you need to go ahead and you need to check the next box with print negative numbers in red. You can optimize for print to file.
What that means is that there are certain types. Okay, there are certain types of PDFs that can be created with the fonts already in them, versus just printing them in a font that every printer, every computer can read. It's a matter of whether it's going to embed the fonts into the file or not. And so this will, the optimize will, I believe, not embed the fonts and make it a smaller file that's not going to take so long to download.
And you can remove the formatting when saving to Excel. And this is kind of tricky because it says it's going to remove that formatting when saving to Excel, but I'm going to tell you it still dumps it out into Excel in a big kind of
hot mess.
Yeah, it's still not a very user-friendly version of Excel once you get it. You're still going to have to do a lot of manipulation and column removing and moving data to get it, but
we're not big fans here.
It helps. And then what Paul was talking about with the embed fonts in the PDF files is there as well. You have the option, a lot of people don't know this, to actually not print the footer at the bottom of reports and things. You know, it's going to have that little Tabs3 and the date and all of that things at the bottom, user initials, things like that. You have the option to turn that off. If you don't want those little footers at the bottom, you can come and do that here. You can also change your font size adjustment and what the gray density is. So if you want it light or dark, and then also the text and line density. So that just kind of makes those things lighter or darker on the page.
This font size adjustment percentage here is probably a far better way to make the font a little bit bigger than to go in and mess with those manual font sizes that we saw up front. That can get, as Mary Jo mentioned, that can get kind of messy.
Yeah.
Here, if you say, you know, if that were just a little bit bigger, I think that our senior partner would be able to read this report better. So what you do then is come in and make this 115, 120, 110.
Did you say senior partner like an older partner, or did you mean senior partner like they're just like a senior partner in the firm? That sounded kind of like an age. I think he meant somebody that couldn't see.
Am I in trouble?
I don't know.
Would it help if I said I'm very old?
I don't think that was politically correct. Anyway, so these are some of the advanced printer settings that we have in here.
Well, hold on one
go
second,
ahead. I'm
Mary
sorry.
Jo, because
Did you have
Patty,
another one?
I think, has a question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Brian would like to know if it is possible to add their firm logo to the statement header.
It is. When we get done, we'll talk very briefly about that, and then maybe we'll, when we're talking about the other videos we have, we'll point him back to one of our other virtual user group meetings where we talked about the statement layout designer, because that's where that would happen. So yes, we might as well just bump out of there real quick. If you go into the statement layout designer, which is going to be under statements.
Let go.
Mary Jo's like, let go, I'll take
Let
care
go.
of it. Right there. And there is a way to insert all sorts of things in here, including images, and there's an example of one
really
with a logo.
Cheesy scales, and there's
but
a little cheesy
here,
but you can put your logo in there and make it look pretty.
This is where you would do it, not in the actual print setup, which is what our topic is today. And so when I talk at the end about where to find all the other recorded versions of our virtual user group meetings, when we look at the search feature there, we'll search for statement layout designer, and we'll try to find an exact reference that he can go to directly.
Yes, and we didn't go into, you know, all of the exact details of everything in here because of time, but if you want to go out to your help and actually look at advanced printing features, it explains what every single one of those things are in here, and you can just, while you're in the window, go ahead and hit help, and that will take you right out to that help and describe every single thing that we have in there. Right. So that's another resource for you as well. So one other thing that we decided that we were going to show you is how to set up another instance of the same printer. And the reason you would want to do that is maybe there's a couple of them. The main one is check printing. Sometimes we have firms that they have a lot of information on their checks, and they need to be able to print a second page for each of the checks to, you know, get it to print out properly for their stubs and things. Or you may have a report that you want to, or a group of reports that are always run in landscape. You don't want to keep changing it back and forth all the time. You want to just manually set it so that it always does that when you choose that printer. Same printer, we're just giving it new properties that is telling it to be landscape or telling it to print page 2 or whatever that would be. So to do that, I'm going to let Paul drive because he's got a little bit more control of where we are.
Well, if I'm going to
you already did one there. Yeah,
I did one, but I'm going to show you how I got there. For us, it's going into the control panel, and for us, that's clicking the start menu twice and going to control panel. Bottom line, you go to control panel and you duplicate the printer. Now, this isn't probably something you want to do. Maybe it is, but it probably is something you're going to have your IT person come down to your desk or call your offsite IT and have them connect to your computer and do it. But if you go into devices and printers and you simply add a printer and add the same printer, okay, I did it already. So I've got this second copy of an identical printer. I didn't give it a second name. You would probably give this a name, leave this name the same, but then this one you'd call
like check printer.
Check printer or something like that.
Yeah, Dell 315 check printer.
Yeah,
or report printer.
Exactly. And then basically what you do is at that point, once you've copied it, and you probably want to rename it and give it some name that's going to make sense, then you end up with two printers in here. You can see I've got the one copy I made right there. You, of course, name it differently. And you've got the original one. And if you take these two printers and set up different defaults for each one, then it might be very complex. You might want to have different margins, different fonts, different this. We do want to show negative numbers in red here, but we don't on the other. You set this one up one way, you set this one up another way, and then to switch between them, you just choose a different printer. That way you don't have to worry about going in if you've got more than one thing to change, or even if it's just one thing to change because of all the drilling down that you've got to do to get in here and then go to the advanced printer settings and get into the landscape setting and change it to landscape and all that and get back out. It's much easier to just set up a separate printer and say, this is the landscape one, this is the portrait one. So be aware of that and understand that that's something that's going to be important to you if you, for instance, have a check printer that's gonna need vastly different settings than when you print to it as a non-check printer. Anything else that we missed, Mary Jo? I think that's pretty much
what we were going to cover.
Okay. So, of course, as we all know, we can't really have a virtual user group meeting without going into Chrome and going to attorneycomputersystems.com. Notice how I cleverly emphasize that last S in the word systems, because if you don't put it there, you won't get to our website. If you hover over this word videos in our header, you'll find all our titles. You can also just click on the word and go to a separate page that lists all our titles. Now, these are all the things that we have content on the web for. So we have 4 live events. 3 of them are virtual user group meetings. You're currently in the Tabs virtual user group. There's a Practice Master virtual user group, and there's a World Docs virtual user group meeting. And I also put on what we call our coffee pot webinars every month, where we take an add-on or an ancillary product, a secondary product usually from a different company, and talk about it. These are all live events. So if we click, for instance, on the Tabs3 virtual user group meeting, you will find a description of the meeting itself. You know, this is our virtual user group meeting for Tabs users. And a listing of the date and time and content of our next event, which is, of course, in September. And I guess we've kind of let the cat out of the bag here. Good time to mention that next month, we will be talking about how to set up bank accounts in trust and how to use custom fields for e-billing in Tabs. Instead of using Miss 1, 2, and 3 and work description and line 4 of client notes or whatever, there's another way that maybe is a little daunting to get set up because you're switching from the old way of doing it, but really makes managing those variables a lot easier when it comes to doing your electronic billing. So you'll find the next event and 2 links to click on. They're going to take you to the same registration page. They just look a little different. This is for people that like to see what they're clicking on before they click on it. This is the same link. And then as you scroll down, you'll see pre-recorded versions of our previous content. Now, here's the one you're in right now. So you'll see it's currently in post-production. Hasn't even made it there yet. Brad won't get it till this afternoon. But when he's done with it, it will show up on this page as a video that you can watch. And so you will find that there are literally hundreds of videos in this section alone. On Tabs3 virtual user group meeting, there's going to be hundreds in Practice Master. There's going to be not quite so many in World Docs because we started that later. I do want to point out also before we search for that one video someone was asking about that we also have 2 pre-recorded non-live video content titles. One is the eBytes video series that Mary Jo does 3 of these each month, 1 on Tabs, 1 on Practice Master, 1 on World Docs. These are little 2 or 3 minute videos with really cool things we found that are very easy to explain, but that we think people may not know about. And so this is Mary Jo's way to tell the world everything there is to know about the cool little things in the software. And then we also have our longer format Paul and Mary Jo show where I or Mary Jo will take a broader topic, one that takes longer than 2 or 3 minutes to explain fully. And we kind of dig deep into it, spend 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes getting into the nitty-gritty of whatever that topic may happen to be. And of course, you can scan through these and kind of just walk through and look at them and scroll through them and look at it that way. But if you wanted, for instance, to find something about the statement layout designer, you might simply type the word statement here, and you can either go with that list that pops up, or you can go here, and let's see if we can find that. Statement comments, credit card remittance. Yeah. Where? Number 7. Oh, because there's a second topic. That's right. Be careful, because as you just learned, there are 2 topics usually with every virtual user group meeting, and so the first topic wasn't what I was looking for, and I just went right past it. So if whoever was asking about that, Patty, was it Brad, Bob? I think I got the Brian. I think I get the B part right. If you go to the April 2012 virtual user group meeting, you will find it. You'll find exactly how to get into the layout designer, how to set one of those up, and how to get a logo in there. And maybe more. Yes. There may be more that you'd find out here. I think if we type statement layout, yeah, okay, Mary Jo says I should type designer. Like any good husband, I listen to everything she says. No, she's not my husband, or she's not my wife. Yeah, there's the April. Create a new layout group in the statement designer. Yeah, that's another thing to know. So yeah, type statement designer in there, Brian, Brad, Bob, Billy Bob, and you'll find what you're looking for. That's it. We're done for the day. We know what we're talking about next week. We've talked about what we need to talk about today. I think that means we're done. Everybody have a good rest of the month, and we will see you next month in September. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks much.